Everybody, Jen Serravallo here. I'm really excited to talk with you for a little bit today about ways to enhance your core reading program or curriculum using my latest book, Teaching Reading Across the Day. Core programs are manuals created by people that don't know your kids, don't know your community. Curriculum may have been created in-house or may have been created externally, but either way, all of these documents, all of these lesson plans that exist already are going to come to life. There's Ponko, my sidekick, are going to come to life when a teacher is using them, right? And so one of the things you're going to notice in my conversation today is that the role of the teacher is really critical in solving some of the issues with potential mismatches between curriculum and your students, or adjustments that can just make the curriculum and program more enhanced, more engaging, more effective, more efficient, and really work for you. In my work with teachers around the country, these are some of the things that I'm hearing are challenges when using core programs. One is time. So I'm hearing people tell me that it takes a lot of time to prepare lessons, to kind of wade through everything that's in the box and figure out what they're going to keep and what they're not going to keep. Because honestly, teaching time is constrained, right? There's not an unlimited amount of teaching time. And many times the curriculum or the core program that you have might have way more in it than what a teacher could possibly hope to fit into a regular school day. And so one of the ways that teaching reading across the day can help is to try to help teachers understand the research-based underpinnings for effective practice in reading instruction and instruction across content areas to make better choices about what to keep and what to cut. And I have really streamlined lesson plan templates where they can take whatever's in their box or whatever's in their curriculum and distill it down to its essence on this one-page template to sort of be their crib notes while they're in front of their students in their class. Another challenge I'm hearing from a lot of teachers is that they have to still teach reading skills. We know that those are really important in teaching strategies for how to accomplish those skills, but we know it's critically important to also be teaching content, right? Through all of the research around the importance of building knowledge as a way to help support students' comprehension, and also the role of literacy in the content areas means that we're balancing these two things in every lesson. And one of the core arguments in this book, and one of the things I help people do, is to understand how every lesson in the content areas, science, social studies, should contain and can contain and will contain reading skills and strategies. And conversely, everything that's in our ELA lessons should also contain content and vocabulary considerations. So we're really balancing content and skills by including both in every single lesson. And third, this sort of relates to the first one, understanding the why behind a lot of the new programs that teachers are receiving. Maybe the procedures are a little bit different. Maybe the texts that teachers are being asked to use are higher level than what they're typically used to. Maybe the way small group instruction is described looks a little bit different. In my book, I unpack all of the research behind why we're making some shifts to sort of elevate our reading instructional practice aligned to research. And really also, of course, a lot of how-to is what I'm best known for, is making things really practical and doable. So I thought I'd talk to you about kind of some big containers of ways that you might look at this book to help you to enhance or refine some of what's in your box. The first one is to think a little bit about scaffolding, right? So one of the things we know from a lot of these new core programs is that they're very heavy on grade level text reading. And if you're like me, and you teach students who really read at a wide range of abilities, in my classroom in New York City, I had kids that maybe read several grade levels behind grade level, all the way up to grade levels above grade level. And so I had to figure out ways to scaffold those who needed extra support, and really to challenge also those who needed an extra challenge. And that's one of the things I unpack in this book. So one way that we might think about scaffolding is through lesson plan type. So one of the things that you might look at in your core program is that a lesson is designed in a certain way, perhaps, for example, anticipating that kids are going to be able to read the text. And you might say to yourself, that's great. That lesson looks great, but I know my students and they need a lot more support with that text type. I need to provide additional scaffolding. So you might change the lesson plan type. In teaching reading across the day, I have 9 lesson plan types with a range of scaffolding. So for example, you might choose a read aloud lesson where you read the text to the students and engage them in conversation, or a close reading lesson where you display the text and read with them and sort of chunk the text and help support their comprehension along the way. Or if you're in the primary grades, maybe shared reading, again, where you display the text and engage in choral or echo reading. So those are just a couple of examples, or a few examples of how the lesson plan type, the actual structure, builds in additional scaffolding because of the teacher moves and the ways that you can support students with this more complex text. It might also be the case that you think about tasks that are asked of students during particular lessons in the core program, and maybe want to change a task to being, rather than a written task, maybe you want it to be a verbal task first and engage them in a lesson plan type, such as a conversation lesson, where you sit as a whole class or in small groups to have conversation about the topic prior to asking them to write. So those are just a few examples that are all really fleshed out well in this book. Another way we think about scaffolding is through the teacher language to support kids as they practice. During the guided practice, while the text is displayed or while the text is in front of students, teachers are going to be prompting, asking them questions, giving them sentence starters, redirecting their attention. And these sorts of prompts are, for every lesson type, are unpacked with a really handy table that gives lots of examples and lots of language. So again, you might keep the lesson as designed in the core program, but you might look to this book to help you with some additional language to provide scaffolding through prompting. We also might think a little bit about assessments. What are the ways that we know that students are actually grasping the material in the core program? This is another thing that I explore in this text. Second, I'm hearing from teachers all over the place that engagement is a little bit challenging with some of the new core programs, that they're not finding kids are paying as close attention to their lessons when they're utilizing direct instruction. And other times it's during independent work periods where kids are not really engaged with their tasks. So engagement is a really big thread throughout this book and something that's really critical to be thinking about. So one of the practical ways that I offer teachers advice for engagement is within each of the different 9 lesson types, how to increase participation opportunities, right? How to get kids to do more, talk more, say more, or even respond non-verbally with like a thumbs up or something written on a whiteboard and held up. You're going to see throughout, all of the description in the text and also the dozens of lessons that are recorded on video, you're going to see the number of times that students are asked to do something, say something, respond in some way to keep them actively working during the lesson. So it's not a passive experience for them. And also to really give teachers opportunities to assess, to see, check for understanding. How are kids doing? And what do I need to do to adjust? Another thing we think about when we think about engagement is the text selection. Again, I started off, at the top of the webinar saying that these programs, while they may be really beautifully written and lean on the research, are written by people that don't know your kids or your community. And so the texts that are included in the program may not really engage your kids, maybe texts they've already read before, maybe on topics that they're really not interested in. And I offer a lot of advice in here for how to select texts, and maybe make easy swap outs with the text, but keeping the core elements of the lesson, and then using the lesson planning templates to quickly create an alternate lesson plan. Pacing is another thing we need to think about when we're considering engagement. So a lesson that kind of drags on, that's paced very slowly, may lose students. And in other cases, we might need to slow down our pacing because we're moving too quickly and things are just sort of flying over students' heads. So that's another thing I explore in this book throughout each of the 9 lesson types is, how long should it take? How long should each part of the lesson take? What's the rhythm within each part? And how does it go? So when you're looking to your core program or your curriculum, again, you can be thinking about, if the lesson feels like it's very long, how do I make strategic cuts to keep the pacing going? And how do I increase opportunities for kids to respond so that they're actively working throughout the entire lesson? Small group instruction. I've looked at a number of core programs that are popular today, and sometimes small group instruction is sort of suggested, but it's not really spelled out. Like, what does a small group actually look like? How do I do it? Who's in my group? What's the rest of the class doing? And so that's one of the things that's explored in this book. All 9 of the lesson types can be used for whole class instruction or small group instruction. So you could think about using the close reading structure that I mentioned before, but with a smaller group of kids for a targeted purpose. All of the lesson types have video examples in both whole class and small group. And I should mention that their video examples are in ELA, in science, and in social studies as well, so that we can emphasize this working across the curriculum. All right, so I start off with research and understanding what's the research say about small group instruction, what makes an effective small group, how do I know when it's worth it to do a small group and leave the rest of the class working independently, and what should be occurring in that small group to make it as most impactful as possible. The lesson planning templates that I provide can be used for whole class or small group, and they're filled in a number of cases to align to either an sort of a retelling of a lesson that starts off each of the 9 chapters and each of the different video examples. So teachers are going to have a lot of opportunity to see what a really pared down, simplified, just the essence kind of lesson plan looks like for these small groups and also for whole class instruction. And then I mentioned this a bunch, right? The video examples, for me anyway, as a teacher, I wanted to not just read about it, I wanted to see it. So I was sure when I created this book to be in real classrooms with students and teach real lessons. And I want to tell you honestly that these videos have really not been edited. I mean, they've been, they have 2 cameras, so we edit it so you could see like the kids' expressions and my faces and stuff like that. But I did not edit out any, awkward pauses or questions that I asked that didn't land well with the kids, because I want teachers to see what real life situations look like and how I adapt and refine plans that I make so that they are engaging and effective to the students in front of me. So that element of responsiveness is really critical. So we'll talk about that now. Again, you have these lesson plans from your curriculum or core program that are already created for you, that have the language you might use to explain things to students, that have the texts prepared for you. It's great that teachers have all that. And what's still up to the teacher is, how do you respond in the moment, right? How do you answer a question, guide kids when they're not getting it, quicken your pace, slow down your pace when you feel like you're losing your students and they're not quite with you. That's all responsiveness. And a big thread throughout this whole book is the balance between planfulness and responsiveness, right? How can I anticipate what my kids need and make a really strong plan? And then when I get into the lesson and I need to do something, how do I make sure that I'm adapting and responding to the students in front of me? And so one of the things I did was to provide a really clear table in each of the 9 lesson type chapters with look-fors. And these look-fors say things like, these are the kinds of things you're likely to see happen in this lesson. Here's what might go wrong, here's what might go right, and here's what I would say, or here's how I'd redirect, or here's how I'd ask a question. And I think that's really helpful for all teachers really, but especially for teachers newer to each of these lesson types to know, kind of get a heads up of what to expect. It's the kind of stuff that more experienced teachers just develop over time, this innate sense of, the ability to anticipate what's likely to happen. I've provided that for you. I've also provided you with language frames or, sentence starters or questions, or the kinds of predictable language teachers might use to respond given those different situations, and the kinds of feedback that I tend to offer kids given those different situations, and prompts as well. We talked about prompting writing. Across the board, like I've told you already, I have these lesson plans that go with the videos and go with the sort of classroom vignettes that start off each chapter. I have these lesson plans written and filled in for you with annotations around them. And the annotations all talk to modification, responsiveness, right? So if you see something in the plan that's different than the video, I'll call it out and I'll say, you didn't see this in the video, I switched it up here and here's why. Or, notice when he says this, here's what I say back and here's why. Or at the end of the lesson, I did this a little bit differently because I was noticing this from the students. So I made this adjustment, I made this change, right? And what I'm trying to do is to help teachers see how their decision-making is really critical, right? In the moment, I'm making decisions, I'm switching gears, I'm modifying, and I'm adjusting because of the students in front of me. I talked a little bit about this already, right? Text selection is going to be critical when we think about really keeping kids engaged, really honoring the diversity in our classrooms and making sure that the texts are resonating with them and that they align to our content standards and that they're helping to develop knowledge and develop vocabulary for students. So in each of the 9 lesson types, I offer advice for what kinds of texts are best for this type of lesson, and how do I select the text? I talk a lot about balancing content and skills within my text selection. So again, I'm always thinking, what's the vocabulary learning that's happening here? What's the content or knowledge learning? And what skills and strategies can I practice in this text to get more from the text and learn more from the text? And I also offer advice for how to reuse texts in a number of different lesson types and in a number of different ways. I think that if teachers have a strong core set of, ideally, I talk a lot about conceptually coherent text sets that are designed carefully around concepts. We can revisit these again and again for a variety of purposes to get more from them. So I hope that was a really helpful, like, kind of beginning introduction. It's a meaty book. You don't have to read the whole thing cover to cover. You can dip in, dip out, or it could make a really great study topic for a PLC meeting or a whole school-wide study, as we're looking at ways to make sure that the core curriculum, the core program is really working for students, is engaging, is effective, is efficient, as it possibly can be. Thanks so much, everybody.